Room 30.
The public. First item on the agenda is apologies, and we have apologies from Patsy McGlone and Harold McKee. Do members have any other apologies? Okay. And just the second agenda item is under Chairperson's business. Harold McKee had attended the National Playing Championships, and I was going to ask Harold to give us a report, but unfortunately he's not here because I think he had a minor car accident this morning, so but he's okay. So we'll just move on with that. Just in terms of Chair's business, I attended a meeting last night. It was a constituency related issue, but it was held in the Bridewell in Maherfelt, and it was in relation to the closure of Social Security and Jobs and Benefits offices. One of the concerns that was raised at that was that there was not proper rural proofing done in relation to these closures. Now, we did raise this last week with Louise Ward-Hunter. I raised it myself with her around, whilst we don't actually have the Rural Needs Act, what is, I suppose, what are the other ministers being asked to do in terms of rural proofing and in terms of Rural Needs Act, because whilst it doesn't come into effect for another year, excuse me, I still think that ministers should already be looking to that. They should already be taking it into account. Why wait until decisions are made and then have to go back over them? You know, I don't think we need to wait until the Rural Needs Act is actually in effect within our own executive. And we were assured that that was the case, that ministers were taking into account the Rural Needs Act. So I would propose that we ask the DAERA Minister to write to or have a discussion with Minister Given and ask him what rural proofing did he carry out in relation to these proposed closures, because I can tell you, coming from that constituency, that this is going to have a massive impact, both, well, specifically on the claimants, and we're talking about people with profound difficulties in relation to disabilities, mental health problems, elderly people, people who rely very much on those frontline staff to help them with everything. And as I made the point myself last night, I have people who come into my office with letters that aren't even opened because they just are unable to deal with their own business, and they rely very much on those frontline staff. And it is about the staff as well and their jobs and positions. But I think that we as a committee who are supposed to be looking after rural people and rural needs, we should be asking our Minister to hold Minister Given to account. Are the committee content that we ask the Minister to do that?
Agreed. Chair,
Robin and then Oliver.
Can we strengthen it in a way to maybe not just to Minister Given but to all the other ministers, that I would be fearful that there could be a cadre of civil servants who are trying to do certain things in rural areas prior to the Rural Needs Bill coming in, that they're using this as a window opportunity to actually close places, offices, services in rural areas before the Rural Needs Bill comes in, and then they have a legal obligation to do something about it. So could we maybe just ask our Minister to put down a marker?
Yeah. Oliver and Kiva.
No,
you go ahead.
right. I think we should to strengthen up the letter. I think there should be mention of the letter for the rural white paper, which was passed and signed up to by all departments within the Assembly here at when I think it was Michelle Gillingham was the Minister at the time, and that within that rural white paper it does say that the rural areas has got to be taken into consideration before decisions are made, etc., etc. So within that rural white paper, there is the need for rural proofing.
Thank you, Oliver. Kiva.
I think the official Louise Ward-Hunter, she says that departments and agencies should be working to the spirit of the Rural Needs Act. So I think that kind of falls into what you're saying.
And I think that the letter to all of the departments is definitely needed. I would like that something specific go on these particular closures, just because the consultation has begun. They've been given 8 weeks. and there is a real fear that this consultation is going to be like some other consultations. Whilst it's done, it's only a paper exercise, and that these offices will be closed regardless.
Sure, it's not only departments and agencies here. We've saw in recent times that we have a major bank too, proposing to close a lot of places in rural areas. So probably goes wider than that. I know maybe we don't, but we can lobby. We can do our best to talk to these people as well. So I think we're bringing in different ministries here, and ever who they are.
No.
I think is a wider issue here.
No, Sidney, you're 100% right. There is a wider issue, and we should use whatever power we can in relation to. But banks are a private enterprise where we have an actual responsibility within the executive. We have to hold them to account. You know, that's our job as a committee, and we need to be holding them to account. So
we're going into a situation maybe, but these private people as well. You know, there's a lot of services being lost. Should it be post office and everything? We can go on, you know, and it does impact on our rural dwellers, especially the elderly ones.
No, I absolutely agree with you, and we should be using whatever power we have in terms of those. But as a committee, we do have some powers to hold the executive to account, and I think we need to do that. Okay. Okay. Members will also be aware that in response to a letter requesting a meeting, it was previously agreed that the Deputy Chair and I would meet the Freshwater Task Force. As advised by way of an email from the Clerk, that meeting is happening today at 1 p.m, I think, but it might be earlier now. And all members of this committee are invited to attend. Okay.
If we can get it moved up, we'll just keep it here after our formal meeting. If not, we're back in room 106 at 1 o'clock.
The meeting's about the
Freshwater Task Force.
Okay. The next agenda item then are the draft minutes. The draft minutes of the meeting of 15th September on page 5. Are members content with the draft minutes? Content? Yep. Okay, the minutes will now be published online. There are no matters arising this week. Okay. As we've already outlined, our first oral briefing from DAERA, we have decided that we're not going to take those briefings because we didn't have the papers on time. And again, agenda item 5, we have decided that we're not going to take the briefing because we didn't get the papers on time, and we are going to write to the Minister. We're agreed as a committee that we're going to write to the Minister and ask that protocol is followed in relation to timescales, that we should have the papers on a Friday. And outside of that, there needs to be discussion with the committee clerk if papers are not forthcoming, but we would expect that papers in relation to any oral briefing or written briefing are with us by Friday, so that they're able to go into the packs. Okay, and we're going to write to the Minister to that effect. Okay, our next agenda item 6 then, is an oral briefing from research in relation to the environment, background and possible Brexit considerations. This is the third briefing from Research and Information Services, and there's a research paper on the briefing at page 45. A further paper in relation to enforcement under OSPAR, following questions at the committee meeting on the 8th of September, is page 73 of table papers. And can I welcome Susie Cave, Assembly Researcher. Thank you very much, Susie.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yes, just as you said, I think the paper's tabled on page 45 of your packs. And really it considers some of the areas under the environment that may be impacted by leaving the EU. And just at this stage, I ask you to bear in mind that obviously the full ramifications of the decision to exit will not be known until such times as the UK has formally negotiated any terms with the EU. And as such, some or all of the information in this paper will undoubtedly be subject to change. So in this instance, the paper really, it does not attempt to provide answers, but merely identifies questions at this stage. So I'll try to take you through the paper in 15 minutes. I'll provide a quick overview and then concentrate mainly on the questions from the table in section 3.1. So just by way of an overview, the main impacts of Brexit on the environment are mostly legislative. with funding, of course, being an important factor for environmental businesses and projects that have availed of EU programmes. The impact of an exit may not only depend on Northern Ireland's involvement and influence over negotiations with the EU, but also the level of control over policy areas retained by the UK or devolved to Northern Ireland. Of course, it is not yet clear what the UK's relationship with the EU will be following withdrawal, but a complete departure from the EU may give the UK government more scope and control over environmental objectives by not being bound to EU requirements. Whether this would involve a relaxation, tightening or continuation of environmental standards remains to be seen, depending on requirements to be obtained by international or global agreements and priorities and negotiations between the EU and the UK. Now, in some cases, a departure away from EU requirements may be difficult. For example, if the UK remains within the EEA or adopts a similar model, it may need to comply with elements of EU environmental law in order to gain access to the single market. Also, many environmental measures predate EU legislative requirements. An example of this is the Birds and Habitats Directives, which introduced requirements that were in fact influenced by long-established domestic legislation in the UK. And also any areas that come under UK systems, such as sites of special scientific interest. The UK is also a signatory to a number of international agreements that it may still be obliged to meet following Brexit. Of course, some of these international agreements have been ratified by the EU and written into UK legislation. However, it is not known whether the UK legislation would still stand or whether new mechanisms would be required post-Brexit, should the UK want to continue as a signatory in its own right. Now, just before looking at the areas identified in the table, on page 6 of the paper, I've identified a number of sort of key questions that could be applied to each area within the table, and these are really aimed at both the Department and the UK Government. So I'll just take you briefly through these. So, for instance, has a scoping exercise of the environmental legislation and associated regulations from the EU been conducted? Has a scoping exercise of EU legislation that derives from international or global agreements been made, and consideration given as to how these will be implemented at the UK and Northern Ireland level? Which of the affected policy areas, legislation and programmes will be retained by the UK Government, and which will be devolved to Northern Ireland? What will be the procedure for any affected legislation? Is it a case of repeal and redraft? How many of the existing EU environmental requirements would the EU insist on for making trade agreements with non-EU countries, i.e. for getting access to the single market? And what will happen to the mainstreams of funding, and how will the Department meet any shortfall? So the table really, it starts on page 6 and 7 of your papers, and it considers some of the environmental areas where law has been largely derived from the EU. Now, there are currently over 650 pieces of EU legislation covering the area of environment alone. So on that basis, this table does not attempt to list all, but the first few columns do highlight some of the main directives and programmes associated with each area and how they relate to Northern Ireland. Now, due to time this morning, I'll not go through all of that detail, but I'll focus mainly on the last few columns of the table. And these highlight some considerations and potential questions, again, mainly aimed at both DAERA and the UK Government. So just starting with waste and recycling. So with a recycling rate of 40.3%, to date Northern Ireland has fallen short of its own interim recycling target of 45% by 2015. Now, this was set to contribute towards the EU's target of 50% by 2020. While withdrawal would reduce the impetus to meet legislative targets and remove the threat of legal challenge from the EU, a lot depends on what would be devolved to Northern Ireland or retained by the UK. So, for instance, in the paper, I've detailed a study by DAERA, which identified up to 22 billion in savings available to UK businesses from more efficient use of raw materials and avoiding waste. So a question could be, would this mean that there may not be a substantial change in approach should the UK maintain control over targets? And also, in relation to any international or global agreements, will there be a need for revised or new UK or Northern Ireland legislation in order to ensure compliance with these agreements, such as the Basel Convention on the transboundary movements of hazardous wastes? Particularly where the EU is the main signatory to these conventions. There's a couple more questions and obviously a lot more detail, but I'm just going to move on through these sections just to keep to the time. Moving on to water quality. In Northern Ireland, 37% of water bodies met good status as required under the Water Framework Directive. Now, according to the Department of Environment in 2015, the extent of Northern Ireland's progressive water quality status is masked due to the one-out, all-out rule for classification as required by the directive. This means that an individual water body can fail for not being up to standard in just one of up to 40 elements assessed. And the same view is also expressed by the UK Government. So really this begs the question, what level of control would be given to Northern Ireland with regards to water quality management? And in this instance, would there be a change of approach to water quality, given that the UK has highlighted problems with the one-out, all-out rule? Northern Ireland currently works in cooperation with the Republic of Ireland for the management of 3 cross-border river basin management districts under the directive. So has there been any dialogue between the Department and the Republic of Ireland in relation to the continued management of these shared river basins? Just moving on then to nature conservation. An exit would mean the UK would not be bound to continue EU requirements, such as the Birds and Habitats Directives. However, at the same time, it may not mean a complete withdrawal from nature conservation requirements. For example, it would depend on requirements of any UK trade deal with the EU. And as part of the EU review of the Habitats and Birds Directive, the UK Government at the time conducted a review in 2011 and 12 and expressed strong support for the EU's requirements. Therefore, it is not known how far the UK would withdraw from EU requirements should it exit. Many requirements also predate EU legislative arrangements, or they are written under UK systems. So will there be discussions around whether a continuation of requirements under the Habitats and Birds Directives may be expected? Northern Ireland, as part of the UK, also contributes to global networks of protected sites created under Ramsar, World Heritage, OSPAR, and also conforms to international agreements such as the Berne Convention and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So will there be a need for revised or new UK or Northern Ireland legislation in order to ensure compliance, particularly where the EU is a signatory of the Convention? And also, due to the consistency of approaches to be used by EU member states, advice on the management of invasive species is given by a joint venture between the Northern Ireland Environment Agency and the National Parks and Wildlife Agency in the Republic of Ireland. This is known as the Invasive Species Ireland. How will there be harmonisation of approaches between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, where requirements may differ post-exit? Just moving on then to the marine section. The Marine Strategy Framework requires Member States to take action to protect the marine environment and to use marine resources sustainably. Implementation of this is at the UK level through the Marine Strategy Regulations 2010 and the Marine Strategy, to which Northern Ireland must comply. The Marine Spatial Planning Directive requires marine plans to be completed by 2021, and these requirements have been transposed in Northern Ireland through the Marine Act 2013. And this provides for marine planning, marine licensing, and further provision in relation to certain electricity works within the inshore region. A couple of questions then really that we've identified would be, will the Northern Ireland Executive seek to continue these areas of regulation following a withdrawal from the EU, especially at the moment where they're in the middle of designating new MCZs for Northern Ireland, and how Brexit might impact those designations? As the Republic of Ireland will continue EU compliance, what form of cross-border cooperation will take place for transboundary marine-based industries and activities? And another question, what consideration will be given to those sites afforded protection by EU law, such as SACs and SPAs, that are not also protected by international treaties. In terms of air quality, the UK, including some sites in Belfast, failed to meet NO2 limits for 2010 and 2015. Now, following withdrawal from the EU, would there be a relaxation, an increase or continuation of targets for pollutants such as NO2? Any change would need to be weighed against the health effects resulting from air pollution exposure. The UK and Northern Ireland have been subject to EU infraction proceedings. Therefore, an exit may remove any future threat of fines. That being said, what enforcement mechanisms would replace it to ensure high standards of air quality are kept? And just moving on then to climate change. An exit would not necessarily remove all climate change requirements. For example, the UK Climate Change Act 2008, while adhering to EU targets, also works towards reaching global commitments set by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The emissions trading scheme is established also under this UNFCCC. Therefore, leaving the EU does not necessarily mean the UK would not have to comply with the ETS. Has clarification been sought on whether Brexit would affect the ratification also of the recently agreed Paris Agreement, which has been signed up to by the UK but hasn't actually been ratified as yet? And another question, currently the UK and Northern Ireland's participation in these agreements is negotiated as a member of the EU. What impact would a single voice at these negotiations have on the UK and Northern Ireland? And could non-EU members make agreements? For example, Switzerland is in negotiations to join the EU ETS to be part of the bigger market. Just moving on to industry. If I'm moving through this too quickly or anything, if you can just let me know, but I'll just try and get through all of it now. So in terms of industry, the EU seeks to regulate industry in a number of areas that impact on the environment, from the design and use of energy efficient products to the use of chemicals and the carrying out of dangerous activities. Now, the Environmental Liability Directive seeks to prevent and remedy environmental damage to protected species, habitats, water and soil by holding responsible operators liable. However, it's been used more in England and Wales than in Northern Ireland, and the UK has listed strengths to the directive. But what are DAERA's view of the ELD? What aspects would it seek to retain or repeal? And what review process would DAERA undertake in order to reach decisions on Northern Ireland's future approach to the interaction between industrial chemicals, products and the environment? Just then the next section. The environmental considerations involved in planning and development process are currently driven by EU legislation. For example, the Strategic Environmental Assessment Directive and the Environmental Impact Assessment Directive set out environmental assessments requirements for plans and projects. Following a withdrawal from the EU, what approach will the Northern Ireland Executive take to this issue? Will there be a relaxation, a tightening, or simply a retention of current requirements? Moving on then to funding. Some of the main streams in funding are identified in column 1. I'll not go through these right now, but a question would be what will happen to the main streams of funding and how will the department meet any shortfall? Now, just recently the Minister has confirmed that funding for the new environmental farming scheme, which is to be opened in 2017, is not covered by the recent commitment by Chancellor Philip Hammond, which guarantees full funding for agri-environmental schemes signed before the autumn statement. However, concerns could be raised around the 100 million allocated to EFS, of which 60 million is EU financed and the rest by national funding. So will the department be able to meet a potential 60 million shortfall from EU funding? And what considerations have also been given to post-2020? And then the final section. This is in relation to judicial review, and this is a process by which courts review the lawfulness of a decision or action or procedure used by a public body. In the area of environment, the procedure used to make a decision may be challenged on the basis of a breach of domestic planning and environmental law or policy, and EU environmental law. There is a 3-month time limit to apply for leave for JR, starting on the date the decision being challenged is made. However, there is no time limit for challenge by EU law. So this sort of raises the questions, would EU withdrawal remove the EU environmental grounds for challenge by JR? And would this mean grounds could only be made in relation to domestic law, and as such a time frame would be applied then to all applications? So say that was a very quick run through the paper. It does cover quite a lot of areas in detail, but unfortunately it really is just scratching the surface. I've mainly kept my area to the environment. My colleague Mark, he's coming up next week looking at agriculture and fisheries. But if there's any areas of the paper that members would like to discuss, I'm happy to go through that.
Thank you very much, Susie. I have to say that that is an excellent paper and very informative, very detailed, and I think that it, for us as a committee, is extremely helpful to us in moving forward. One of the suggestions that I would make maybe to the committee and would be to pose the question now in writing to the department that are on page 6, and then the questions that are on in each section of those table. Now I know that the response that will come back will be, we don't have answers to many of these questions, and that's fair enough, but they need to know what the questions are that we will want answered, you know, as time moves on and things become clear. And I think that that is how we need probably to move forward. So I think that this has been an extremely helpful paper. Susie, thank you very much. I appreciate it. David, you wanted to?
Thank you, Chair. Can I agree with that and thank Susie and indeed Mark, at least for asking the questions which don't seem to be being asked anywhere else, and it's clear that there are very few answers to many of them. Can I ask a quick question to which I should know the answer? Is the Aarhus Convention specifically part of EU law? Just because you ended on JR, you reminded me of it.
Sorry, say that again.
The Aarhus Convention, specifically in terms of cost protection, environmental challenges, is that EU or is that a wider?
Off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure.
Well, I should have known, so we'll forgive you for that.
No, I do remember the last Environment Committee asking about the Aarhus Convention, and in terms of they actually seek legal advice on that. So, but again, I couldn't tell you just off the top of my head.
Okay. One thing which I can't get my head around is how far EU legislation, various directives and so, which has been incorporated into domestic legislation at either UK or Northern Ireland level, is going to continue or potentially be lost. You know, should we actually reach the point the UK leaves the EU? Is it not logical that that which has been incorporated into domestic law, as opposed to is merely sitting with an overarching directive, should be there? Although I know there are potentially procedures at Westminster which might remove a large amount of it. But in terms of Northern Ireland, is there any different legal advice as to where our domestic legislation stands?
There hasn't really been anything to that level and specific discussion as yet. I know that at the minute the Committee on Environment and Climate Change in Westminster, they're currently conducting an inquiry into the implications on climate change policy. So at this stage there has been very, very little detail, and again it's just a question that could be asked to either DAERA or the UK government.
And in terms of the potential for issues like marine and wildlife issues, which we clearly have on a cross-border basis, and indeed the UK in terms of marine has on a cross-border basis, is there anything to be learned from countries like Norway or Switzerland in terms of cooperation between another member state and the EU as a whole, in terms of how we deal with that?
Those are examples, I have to say, I haven't looked into in specific detail or anything. In terms of Switzerland and Norway, they have developed their own bilateral agreements in a number of different areas. And you look into Switzerland and you're talking about, these are hundreds of different bilateral agreements. So there could be something under that that would maybe be of use to have a look into to see. But as I say, you're talking about hundreds of different agreements in different areas. And a lot of it seems to come back to on the basis of trade.
I'm tempted to ask how good your German and your French are, but that
Oh,
would perhaps be unkind. Sorry, Chair, that sounded like I was being critical. It was certainly not intended to be, but I was trying to highlight some of the further issues we still need to look to. So thanks, Susie.
Okay, thank you.
Oliver?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Very, very good indeed. The control of our inland waterways is one that I see as problematic. The seabed, the loch bed, and that there, two jurisdictions. One would be European, and one we don't know where it'll be. So that there in itself could cause a problem. I'm thinking of Loch Foyle. What goes on there, especially in aquaculture. The shortfall in funding is another one, where that's going to come from. The other one is animal health. That's a big thing for our agricultural industry here. We need to be talking to the government in the south. Now, whether we like that idea or not, we have to, because they will have to come up with a programme of how they're going to work with us for animal health, such as TB, all of that there. And that is one of the big ones. We operate in all Ireland approach at the minute in animal health. Now, if this Brexit thing and all the rest of it, that could throw that for negotiations. So we need to be talking to the government in the south on those issues. That's not coming through there. That needs to come through in those. I feel it needs to come through in those papers, because not only are we going to have problems with England and their negotiations and where they're going to negotiate from, but we need to be negotiating the other way to the south of Ireland as well, to protect what we have here, because we are an island, and that's sometimes lost in a lot of people. And we are the only island here. So that needs to come out more on how we're going to work with the government of the south. And when we talk about laws, do we lose the European Court completely? You know, the human rights laws and all of that there, we fall back then to the laws in England. You have the English laws, that's the only law we can appeal to. We can appeal to the European Court.
Well, certainly those are important points in relation to the EU Court and human rights. That's not something that I could really answer today. In terms of what you're saying about negotiation with across the border, and the paper, you know, it has highlighted in a number of areas, you know, even in terms of you know, river basin management, endangered species legislation, you know, that's all coordinated from the body in the south as well. So there are a number of areas that will need to continue those that dialogue.
And also, just to finish, the fishing and under our own waters here to the 12-mile limit, that's one thing. But when we go outside the 12-mile limit, we're into international waters. How do we take it from there? Because everything within the 12-mile limit on the seabed is dictated by the Crown Estate. Now, where do we come there? Are they negotiating on our behalf? Say, for example, gas pipelines, interconnectors, etc. Who negotiates for us?
Yep.
No?
That again is an important question that needs to be asked. In terms of specifically on fisheries, I'm not looking to pass the buck or anything, but Mark, he's coming up next week, and I think that was one of the areas he was trying to look into about boundaries, as I know Harold had raised that before.
That's grand. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Susie. Sydney?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Shirley, for that detailed presentation. One of the things that sticks out straight away is in your presentation, 650 pieces of legislation for the environment alone. I think, if anything, we've often heard we're over-regulated. In many ways, you hear it coming through each and every day as far as the EU is concerned. And And I think some of the points you made, maybe it was nature conservation. You said there's some of that regulation predates when we entered the EU, goes back some time. I was just wondering, is there other areas where maybe not just nature conservation, but where there's a lot of legislation in there that predates as well? And also, if anything, out of this all, we have to get to a place where there's less regulation. Maybe you give an opinion on that, like 650 pieces. It's a lot to do with the environment. I don't know. We can't look into a crystal ball. We don't know what the answers are going to be. But you know, I think if anything, we need to move to less regulation.
Yeah.
These directives from Europe, it's burdensome to say the least.
Important point also is yes, also looking at areas that maybe predate EU, but also areas where there has been coming under the UK system, which has then been adopted by Northern Ireland, and so identification of those would be important. For instance, the likes of the Marine Act. From the UK, a lot of those requirements now that have come through then into our own primary piece of marine legislation, and as it stands, could it be applied as it stands? Will there be any alteration? Because obviously a lot of those requirements within it do fundamentally come under EU requirements as well, but could there be, or would there be, any slight sort of alteration under those primary pieces of legislation? But the main one that the UK has been highlighting as the area that has predated a lot of EU requirements has been in relation to nature conservation.
Is there any other ones that you know of?
Not off the top of my head, but I can have a look into that.
Yeah. Maybe, and say, if anything can be done to reduce this, as I said, burdensome regulation, sort of. We're stuck with. I think we're looking to move towards that, because that is one of the big issues. Certainly, I look forward to some of the debates around it.
And at this stage, it can be hard to come back with a conclusive list, but I could maybe come back with a few examples and that sort of thing. So.
But thank you very much, Susie, for that. Thank you.
I think Mar's coming in, but just before you do, I think probably just the point needs to be made that taking away regulation is a very simplistic view, and all of the stakeholders that I met, every single one of them said that all of the things that they're having to abide by in terms of Europe, I'm talking about the Agri-Food Strategy Board, Ulster Farmers Union, NIAPA, I can't even think of most of it, but I mean, I have met large numbers of stakeholders over the summer months, and every one of them, bar none, all of the environmental groups and all of the agriculture groups have said the regulations that are there in terms of Europe need to be kept, because the thing that we have going for us in terms of our produce is the quality of it. And the quality of it is guaranteed by all of the legislation, environmental as well as agriculture. So I think that it can be a very simplistic view and seems like an easy answer, but the groups that we're meeting with, the representatives of the farmers, the representatives of the environmental groups are saying we need the regulation that came from Europe. We want it to be lifted and transferred straight over. So I think that before we go cutting out regulation, we better speak to the people who are going to be affected.
I think we're looking for, Chair, and I said in no way I'm just looking at the pieces of legislation, and I'm sure there's not, maybe one of us would say that that doesn't need to be looked at, and there's not pieces of legislation that could be better regulated. And some of the legislation, I'm sure we've all had difficulties with it. So I would like to see whatever is done in the future, that we would get to a position. We're not saying we don't want regulation, we don't think it's done in a proper manner, but I think it's the way it's being done and how it's being done, I think we're trying to do.
I'm not sure that sitting in this building we're in much position to criticise other people over their legislative processes.
Sorry?
Sitting in this building, we're not in a great position to criticise others for the way they legislate.
Okay, I think we'll let Morris come in.
You really asked the question. I mean, I have it here that there needs to be a lot of discussion, Chair, around all the existing regulations, and where we can keep them, we keep them, but more importantly, where we can enhance them, we take the opportunity to enhance them. But, you know, for the environment, waste management, marine environment, the whole plethora of stuff right across the whole spectrum, we need to look at what we have, dissect it, keep the good bits, enhance them, and move forward from that. But an awful lot of discussion, Chair, an awful lot of discussion.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. Okay, nobody else has indicated. Sorry, David, you're...
I was just going to try to give Oliver a wee bit of advice. When you say the European Court, do you mean the European Court of Human Rights, of which the UK will remain a member, subject to any current decisions in Westminster, or the Court of Justice of the European Union, which we would obviously leave?
Court of Human Rights.
So the human rights legislation will stand depending upon what the current government chooses to do.
Just one other thing, Chair, on animal health there, European law on animal health, there's still no direction from, I'm saying English law now, that covers us here, for example, on the eradication of TB and getting a new vaccine. Now, there's no direction here from English law if they can allow a vaccine out on a quicker period of time than what is allowed through Europe. Sometimes it's up to 15, 20 years for a new vaccine to come through. That's something that we need to find out as well. Because,
I think again we might have to ask Mark that one. Am I right in saying that, Susan?
Mark's going to be delighted. But yeah, the animal health, I know that Mark has covered that within his paper under agriculture section.
Even with animal health and even with animal exports for produce, if we are exporting out, we need to have a level of a charter how good we are, and it's all agreed. And as the chair said, all the main people in the agriculture industry have said that the present EU laws needs to stay, because we can't be exporting under anything different.
And again, some of those will still come under international agreements. Yeah. It's just figuring out at this stage who is the direct signatory of those. If it comes in under the EU, who signs on behalf of member states, or directly by the UK. And one off the top of my head is the CITES agreement on the trade of endangered species. So obviously requirements have been written in under that, but it just depends on whether that is as a signatory of the EU or directly the UK.
Madam Chairperson, thank you. And I think on commenting on the 650 pieces of legislation in and around environmental issues alone, tells me that Europe has been unable on many occasions to get it right, and they've added pieces and pieces of legislation, but it seems crazy to have 650 pieces of legislation in and around the environment alone. And it does tell us something about the bureaucracy in Europe, and I think surely I would have thought they don't need 650 pieces of legislation if they were able to get it right the first time, but I think it would look to me that they've been added on pieces of legislation where they've seen they hadn't got it right on many occasions. Well, and I presume that would be the case.
In some cases, they have been written as part of the global agreements and any conventions. So some of them haven't been just directly drawn up from the EU, but requirements incorporated into those directives on the basis of any global requirements.
Okay, but
it's just trying to identify which of those are, and that's where it becomes complex.
Okay.
I don't think that we should, I suppose, focus on the figure of 650. I think that the important, you could say, right, we need to get rid of 350 pieces of regulation, but I think you need to actually look at each of the regulations, because all 650 of them might be vital pieces of regulation, and if they are, they are. So I think before we decide, we have to get rid of some of them.
Or not.
No, 100%. You're 100% right. Yeah. But I do think that we need to see what the regulations are before we decide that we need rid of some of them. Okay. Nobody else has indicated, so I think we'll let Susie go now. Okay. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Our next agenda item then is a written briefing from DAERA policy on quiet area and designation of areas. Sorry. At page 77 of your table pack, there is a written briefing from the Department on quiet areas and the designation of areas. The paper is in table packs. It was received yesterday. Do members have any comments? Or do they wish to receive an oral briefing on this paper? Are you content to note?
Or put it back on, maybe for...
Or do you want to put it back
Put
on?
it on again, yeah.
Because, again, we didn't really get time to read those. Okay, happy enough that it'll be put back on. Agenda item 9 then again was a written briefing from the department on the update and the headquarters relocation, and we're not getting a written briefing on that. However, we had some discussion, and we do believe that it's important that the department, there is some change to the plans and what's going to happen in relation to that relocation, and we do need to be updated on the detail, and we did say last week that we would like an oral hearing, an oral briefing rather, specifically in relation to that. So I think that we need to keep that on the agenda, and we shouldn't let it go for any real length of time. We need to be kept updated by the department as soon as they have some detail on that. I think that it's extremely important that we are kept briefed on what is going to happen in relation to the relocation. Robin?
Yeah, Chair, fully agree. Sorry, Chair, you said there they decided we're not going to get a written briefing. Does the department have that ability or authority to decide that this committee isn't getting a written brief if we require one or ask for one?
Good point.
No, we can insist that we want the written briefing. To be honest, we had, in the discussion last week that came out of the conversation actually with the department officials, was that we would prefer an oral briefing because there did seem to be some change, and we would prefer that we're able to ask questions, and we want it to be when there is some information to give us, rather than getting a written briefing on what we already heard last week, which was very little, to be fair. There was very little detail on it, but we do want the detail as soon as it's known to the department, and we want the officials to come before this committee so that we can question them on it.
I'm just concerned that they come back and say, no, we're not giving you a written briefing next week because you already heard everything we had to say. No, that's a bit...
No, we can
It's
insist.
disrespectful to this committee, and it's...
I think, Chair, what Robin is suggesting is we should write back and accept that they haven't actually got anything to tell us at the minute, but that doesn't mean we've forgotten the concept of a proper oral briefing in the relatively near future. Yeah?
Yeah. That's what
Trying to be diplomatic.
Yeah. That's maybe where you come in.
Want to write to the department in relation to that stuff? Okay. Eva?
I was just going to pick up on that, and maybe prior to the oral briefing, we did have a written briefing on their plans, but obviously when they have something of substance to tell us.
Okay. Members happy enough to move on? Agenda item 10 then, correspondence. Correspondence index sheet is at page 65 of the meeting pack. The index sheet summarises the correspondence and suggests actions for the committee to take. For ease of reference, action points are in bold. Our members agreed to action the correspondence as suggested on the index sheet. Excuse me. I'll give members a moment to look at those if they want. Okay, are members content that we move forward with the action suggested? Okay, the next agenda item is the draft forward work programme on page 148 of your packs, and there's also an agenda for Environment Week at page 155 of your packs. Are members content to agree the draft forward work programme? Do you want to take it?
How quickly are we trying to slot in what we didn't get today?
Probably it'll be after the 6th of October, so I'll get it slotted in as quickly as I can.
That's fair enough, it's reasonably quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Happy enough. Just members will note that in relation to Environment Week, a programme of long gallery events has been included in the packs. Something which has not been mentioned in that is in the programme, is the biodiversity tour. There will be 2 tours of the Stormont Estate on Tuesday, one at lunchtime, which is 1 o'clock, and one at 4 p.m. Any member wishing to attend the tour should advise the committee office clerk so that the necessary arrangements can be made. And can I just remind members that next week we have our strategic planning day in the WOW Centre in the Harbour Estate, and there will be an agenda coming out with directions and so on to the Harbour Estate.
That's the opportunity for members to start planning what they want this committee to do, not only just in the next few months, but probably over the rest of the mandate. So it's probably quite an important foundation meeting for the committee. So I'm trying to encourage everybody to attend.
Chair, can I just seek clarity or guidance on that? In regards to lobbying from organisations or individuals as to what we should have in our strategic plan, how is that going to be handled, managed or recorded even? Because I've had a number of organisations come to me aware that our strategic planning day is next Thursday, asking for certain items to be put on the agenda, and it concerns me that maybe that information hasn't been given to all, or all organisations are aware that that's an avenue that could be open, and I'm just concerned about that level of lobbying and how it influences.
Well, I can only speak from my own point of view, but obviously as a party you will have priorities, you know, or as even as an individual and independent, you will have priorities and things that are important to you, and I think probably in the first instance you want to identify those. But I did actually, and I mean our grouping contacted as many groups as possible and asked them to, you know, come and speak to us to try and find out what their priorities were, because whilst I say as a party and or as an individual you might have your own ideas of what are priorities, when you actually get speaking to some of the organisations you might find out that they're not the real priorities for people out there. So it's not an easy one, to be honest with you, but you're right, there are some lobbyists out there that are very good.
I thought we had guidance on lobbying as MLAs, but as how that comes into committee work, and especially the working out of a strategic plan.
That would come under fact finding. You're going out there to find out what you're going to do in the future. You need to ask somebody. Fact finding there, Robin. You know,
fact finding.
I think there's. I'm aware that some members, because they have received emails or communications from other groups, those have not come to the committee office, so they're not official committee correspondence, and I will not be bringing. Which concerns me further. Then I will not be bringing those to the committee for consideration. So it's obviously people trying to individual organisations individualing you as lobbying you as individuals or as party representatives.
I know in the past the committee did, in the strategic planning days, the committee would have received correspondence from just going to individuals.
I think probably, and obviously between us all we will probably have been lobbied by different organisations and we'll have our own ideas, but I think the fact that we all have to agree and we have to decide as a group and what are the priorities and what are the things that are important to us moving forward, and I would like to think that we will get, you know, I suppose an agreed way forward on what the priorities are, and generally I think that does seem to be the case, that, you know, most people are agreed on what the priorities are, regardless, even if you have different positions on how you should move forward, you know that they're the priority item. But if there are any issues in relation to that come up on the day, we can certainly address them on the day. Yeah. Okay, so unless members have anything else that they wish to.
I know, Madam.
The next meeting is our strategic planning day is next week, but our next meeting here is on Thursday, 6th of October, in room 30 at 10 a.m.
Good.
And remind